Sirens cut through the quiet suburban afternoon as I ran barefoot across the grass, the smell of gunpowder still clinging to the air. My daughter was on the ground, her therapy dog barking wildly, and all I could see was blood soaking through her jeans. Neighbors stood frozen on their porches, some filming, others crying, but no one moved fast enough. The paramedics yelled something I couldn't hear. My ears were ringing. My knees gave out. All I could do was grab her hand and whisper, "Stay with me, baby. But let me take you back." This wasn't supposed to happen. We moved here for peace. Quiet streets, a good school district, accessibility for my daughter's wheelchair. It was meant to be a fresh start. Instead, we were met with hostility cloaked in passive smiles. At the center of it all was a woman named Karen. Yes, that kind of Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA. She didn't like us from the start. Maybe it was the ramp we built for my daughter, maybe it was the therapy dog, or maybe she just didn't like being told no. What she didn't know, what no one in the neighborhood knew, was that I am a federal judge. I don't just know the law, I enforce it. And when she pulled that trigger, when she decided to take my daughter's life into her own hands, she had no idea she'd just declared war on the wrong mother. This wasn't just going to end in an arrest. This was going to end in justice. Before everything spiraled out of control, our life was simple. Not perfect, but peaceful. I had just accepted a new appointment in the federal circuit, which came with the privilege and the burden of moving to a quieter, more affluent suburb. My daughter, Ava, was the reason I chose this particular neighborhood. She's 12, bright as the sun, and stronger than most adults I know. After the accident 2 years ago, when a reckless driver ran a red light and changed our lives forever, Ava had to relearn everything. She lost the use of her legs. The trauma was deep, but her spirit refused to bend. We worked hard for her recovery. Between hospital visits, therapy sessions, and endless insurance battles, I became more than just a mother. I became her advocate, her voice, her defender. We adopted Charlie, her golden retriever, as a therapy dog. He goes everywhere with her, grounding her when the anxiety creeps in and giving her the confidence to face each day. I wanted a home where she could feel safe, where the sidewalks were smooth enough for her wheels, and where she could enjoy a backyard again. The neighborhood seemed perfect at first glance. Tree-lined streets, quiet evenings, friendly hellos from dog-walking neighbors. We moved in during spring, when the flowers bloomed along every driveway and kids played basketball in cul-de-sacs. Ava immediately took a liking to our backyard, and we spent hours planting flowers and painting her new ramp. We didn't expect trouble, certainly not from the Homeowners Association. I knew there'd be rules. I'd read every line of the HOA bylaws before we closed on the house. We weren't breaking any. At that time, I didn't see the stares. I missed the whispers. I chalked up the cold greetings to small-town reserve. But Ava noticed. She once asked me why the neighbor lady always frowned when she waved. I told her not to worry, that people sometimes need time to adjust. But I should have listened closer to my instincts, to the subtle tension hiding behind forced smiles and clipped conversations. Because beneath the pristine lawns and manicured hedges, there was rot. And it was only a matter of time before someone tried to poison the peace we had worked so hard to build. It was only a week after we'd moved in when I first met her, Karen. She approached me while I was unloading groceries from the trunk, clipboard in hand, sunglasses pushed up into her stiff blonde hair like a permanent crown. Her smile was thin, almost brittle, and her tone teetered on that delicate edge between friendly and threatening. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, eyeing the ramp we had just finished painting 2 days earlier. "Just a friendly reminder, we have to get HOA approval for structural modifications like that. It's in the handbook." I explained calmly that the ramp wasn't structural. It was a temporary removable accommodation for my daughter, in full compliance with ADA guidelines and the HOA's own bylaws. Her lips tightened. She nodded, but I could tell she didn't like being corrected. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't a neighbor dropping by with cookies. This was someone who saw herself as a gatekeeper, and us as trespassers. Karen didn't yell, not at first. She didn't need to. Her power was in the petty, passive-aggressive notes tucked under our doormat, citing us for excessive lawn growth or improper trash bin placement. One time she knocked on our door just to inform me that Charlie, Ava's therapy dog, seemed too large for a neighborhood with children. I stared at her, incredulous. He is a service animal, for my daughter. Karen just raised her eyebrows and walked away. Ava noticed too. She became more hesitant to play outside, more withdrawn. The first time Karen scolded her for riding too fast in her wheelchair along the sidewalk. Yes, riding too fast. I had to take a walk around the block just to cool down. I found Ava on the porch afterward trying to smile, pretending it didn't bother her, but it did. Neighbors began to distance themselves from us. Some waved, but didn't stop to chat. Others avoided eye contact altogether. One woman across the street seemed kind, often offering a small wave from her porch swing. But when Karen was around, she quickly ducked back inside. It was clear Karen held some kind of invisible authority here, a grip on this place that no one wanted to challenge. Still, I told myself it was manageable, that people like her only thrive if you let them, that if we kept to ourselves, followed the rules, she'd move on. I didn't realize then that Karen didn't just want order. She wanted control. And my daughter's independence was something she couldn't tolerate. At first, I tried to brush off the tension as typical neighborhood politics. We kept our yard immaculate, abided by every rule in the HOA handbook, and made no modifications beyond what was necessary for Ava's access and safety. But that didn't stop the notices. They started appearing like clockwork. Bright orange slips taped to our door or slipped under the mat. Violations for things so trivial they felt made up. Excessive decorative elements on porch, referring to the potted flowers Ava and I had planted together. Noise disturbance from canine barking, even though Charlie barked only when someone approached the gate. One morning, we found a warning about unsanctioned mobility equipment, Karen's new term for Ava's wheelchair ramp. Then came the emails. Cold, mechanical, and always signed, warmly Karen, HOA board chair. She cited obscure clauses, demanded photos of every part of our property, and implied legal consequences for non-compliance. I responded formally, attaching documentation and ADA guidelines each time. Her tone grew icier, as if each legal rebuttal bruised her ego. I began to feel like I was back in court, drafting arguments not to defend a criminal, but to protect my daughter's right to live in peace. Ava stopped going outside on her own. Once so lively and independent, she began asking me to accompany her just to water the flowers. She was afraid. Not because Karen had done anything violent, yet, but because of the stares. The way Karen would pause at the end of the driveway just to watch her, arms folded, lips pursed, like a judge passing sentence without speaking a word. Then it got worse. One morning, I found our mailbox dented and hanging crooked on one hinge. Another night, our tires had been slashed. Both of them. Deep, clean cuts that no rock or accident could cause. The police came and wrote up a report, but there were no witnesses. No cameras caught the act. When I checked the footage from the neighborhood's shared security system, the clips from that night were conveniently missing. We installed our own camera soon after. I didn't announce it. I wanted it to capture her exactly as she was when she thought no one was watching. And it did. Karen pacing in front of our house, talking on the phone and pointing at our windows. Karen taking photos of our dog, zooming in aggressively as if building some imaginary case. Karen leaving another note, this time not on HOA letterhead, but handwritten and cruel. If you can't follow the rules, maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for your kind. That night, I sat at my desk, reviewing every file, every message, every violation slip. The evidence was piling up, and part of me considered pressing charges. But a stronger part of me, the mother, not the judge, wanted to believe it would stop before it reached a breaking point. I didn't know we were already past it. The storm was coming, and it would arrive with the crack of a gunshot. It was one of those rare afternoons where everything felt calm. The sun was out, the sky a quiet blue, and Ava had just finished her physical therapy session. She asked if she could sit outside with Charlie and listen to music while I made lunch. I remember looking at her through the kitchen window, her earbuds in, smiling as Charlie chased a butterfly through the grass. It was the kind of peace we hadn't felt in weeks, and I let myself believe, just for a moment, that maybe things were finally settling down. I was halfway through slicing vegetables when I heard it. The shout. Muffled at first, then louder, sharper. I dropped the knife and rushed to the window. Karen was at the edge of our property, gesturing wildly, yelling something I couldn't make out. Ava had taken her earbuds out and was looking up, confused but not afraid. She said something in return, something I couldn't hear, probably trying to de-escalate. She always tried to be kind, even when she shouldn't have had to. Karen stepped closer, too close. Charlie ran between them, barking, protective. Karen flinched and yelled again, and then, like some sick scene unfolding in slow motion, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small black handgun. My breath caught in my chest. Before I could scream, before I could run, two sharp cracks echoed through the air. Ava screamed and collapsed. Charlie howled and darted away. I bolted out the door, my feet barely touching the ground as I ran across the yard. My daughter was lying on her side, blood pooling beneath her legs. Her hands trembled as she reached for me, her face pale, her eyes wide with pain and disbelief. "Mom, my legs," she whispered. "I can't feel them." I screamed for someone to call 911, my voice raw and broken. A neighbor ran over, already on the phone with dispatch, while another brought a towel to press against the wounds. Karen stood frozen at the edge of the lawn, the gun dangling loosely from her hand, her face blank as if she didn't fully grasp what she had done. The sirens came fast, first the police, then the ambulance. The paramedics worked quickly, lifting Ava onto a stretcher while trying to slow the bleeding. Charlie had returned, whimpering and pressing his body against my side as I knelt beside her. I tried to stay strong, but the sight of her blood on the grass shattered something inside me. Karen didn't resist when the officers approached her. She muttered something about self-defense, about being threatened by the dog and the girl's wheelchair moving too fast. The officers exchanged a look, and I saw it in their eyes. They weren't buying it. As the ambulance doors closed and sped away with my daughter inside, I stood there shaking, covered in blood, staring at the woman who had just stolen what little freedom my child had left. She didn't know who I was, but she was about to learn. At the hospital, everything blurred into fluorescent lights, rushing footsteps, and clipped conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. Ava was wheeled straight into surgery, and I wasn't allowed past the double doors. A nurse gave me a clipboard with forms I couldn't read, and asked me questions I could barely answer. I sat there, numb, her blood still on my hands, my shirt soaked from kneeling beside her. Charlie wasn't allowed inside, so a kind security guard offered to sit with him outside while I waited. I kept replaying it in my head. The sound of the shots, the look on Karen's face, calculated, like she was proud of herself, like she believed what she'd done was justified. The image of Ava falling, her voice barely a whisper, haunted me. I had seen trauma before, sat through trials that made grown men cry, but nothing compared to the helplessness I felt in that moment. About an hour later, a detective arrived to take my statement. He was polite, but hesitant, clearly not used to dealing with someone from the federal bench. I gave him everything. Every note, every email, photos of the damage to our home, a full timeline of the harassment. His pen stopped when I mentioned the missing security footage. His brows furrowed. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. "You're not the first one to have trouble with her." I wasn't surprised, but I was angry. Angry that no one had done anything sooner. Angry that she'd been allowed to roam unchecked with that smug superiority. Angry that it took a bullet to finally make people pay attention. Back at the precinct, Karen sat in an interview room, arms crossed, eyes defiant. She told the officers that she felt threatened by Ava's dog, that the girl's wheelchair was coming at her aggressively, and that she feared for her life. She claimed it was self-defense. But what she didn't know, what would seal her fate, was that a neighbor had captured the entire thing on their Ring camera. Every word, every step, every moment of escalating hostility, all recorded. When they showed her the footage, her expression changed. That cold confidence began to crack. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes darting toward the mirror, as if someone would step in and rescue her. Then, as if reaching for her last defense, she asked for a lawyer. But before they left the room, one of the officers said something she didn't expect. "You know who her mother is, right?" Karen blinked. "Number. And I don't care. She's a federal judge. You just shot a federal judge's daughter. In broad daylight. On camera." Silence. For the first time, Karen's posture collapsed. Her face went pale, because now she knew this wasn't going away quietly. There would be no neighborhood committee to smooth things over, no private scolding or swept under the rug resolution. She hadn't just made a mistake. She'd committed a crime so public, so heinous, that no title, no board, no arrogance could protect her anymore. Karen was still holding on to the belief that she could control the narrative. Even after the arrest, even after the footage had gone viral among the precinct's officers, she behaved as though this was just a misunderstanding that could be handled quietly. Her attorney arrived the next morning, a polished man in an expensive suit who seemed confident he could spin the story in her favor. They requested bail, claimed Karen was a respected community member with no criminal record, said she acted in a moment of panic. The words were delivered with practiced concern, but behind them was the same smug entitlement Karen always carried, this certainty that she was the victim. I stayed silent through it all. I didn't need to yell, didn't need to threaten. The evidence spoke for me. The footage, the history of harassment, the letters, the calls, the slashed tires, a pattern of intimidation, targeted cruelty. The kind of sustained malice that only made sense when you realized she didn't see Ava as a child, just an inconvenience. What Karen didn't realize, what her lawyer didn't realize, was that I'd already initiated a parallel federal case. Not as a judge, but as a citizen with knowledge of how to make sure the law wasn't just followed, but enforced. Civil rights violations, hate crime enhancements, a DA interference. The kind of charges that didn't just stick, but carved scars into reputations and records forever. It wasn't until the arraignment that the pieces began to fall into place for her. She walked into the courtroom and saw me sitting quietly behind the glass, not in robes, not presiding, but present, watching, listening. Her eyes widened, and I could see her finally putting it together. Her expression shifted, not to remorse, but to fear. Not the fear of punishment, but the fear of being exposed, of losing control. She leaned over to her attorney, whispering furiously. He paused, turned, and looked directly at me. I met his gaze without flinching. No words needed to be exchanged. In that moment, the illusion cracked. Karen wasn't just facing the law, She was facing the embodiment of it in someone she had underestimated from the very beginning. Her arrogance had carried her this far, but now it was dragging her straight into the one place she couldn't manipulate, intimidate, or silence: a courtroom. And this time, justice wasn't just an idea, it was personal. The courtroom was packed that day, not for Karen's case, but for a sentencing I was scheduled to preside over. The press hadn't caught wind yet, but whispers had started circulating in the legal circles. About a federal judge whose daughter had been shot in her own yard, about a neighbor with a reputation for HOA bullying, and about a video that had made its way quietly through law enforcement networks. I took the bench with my usual calm, gavel resting in front of me, robe straightened, voice steady. But beneath the surface a storm brewed, not of rage, but of resolve. Karen was brought into the courtroom just as my session was ending. She wasn't expecting to see me on the bench, certainly not in full authority, delivering judgment in another case with the weight of the law behind my every word. She froze. I watched her from the corner of my eye as the clerk read out the sentence in front of me. 10 years for fraud and obstruction in an unrelated matter. And I gave my final remarks to the defendant, a man who had at least shown remorse. Then I turned to leave the bench, eyes passing over Karen for only a second, but the message was clear. This wasn't about intimidation. I had recused myself from her case, and rightfully so. But I was still the figure she had once mocked, belittled, and tried to dominate, now standing in the place she never imagined I belonged. Her smirk was gone. Her posture had wilted. Her attorney sat stone-faced beside her, likely re-evaluating every step they had taken. Later that day, in a different courtroom with a different judge, Karen was read her charges. The footage was played aloud. The gasps from those in attendance echoed through the room. The prosecutor outlined a pattern of harassment and targeted aggression. She tried to speak, to explain, but it was too late. Her words couldn't erase the sound of a child's scream or the sight of a girl falling from her wheelchair after being shot. As I sat silently in the back, listening, not speaking, I realized justice doesn't always need to roar. Sometimes, it only needs to stand tall, quiet and immovable, like a gavel poised in midair. Karen had tried to control a neighborhood. She ended up facing a system far bigger than she could bully. And now, the scales were finally tipping. Karen was sentenced to 20 years in prison, 15 for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and 5 more for civil rights violations tied directly to her targeted harassment of a disabled minor. The courtroom was silent when the verdict was read, but the air was thick with emotion. No one clapped, no one celebrated, but justice had landed like a thunderclap, final and irrevocable. Within days, the case made headlines. Footage from the neighbor's doorbell camera was leaked and quickly went viral. National news outlets ran segments about the HOA neighbor who shot a disabled child. The outrage was swift and loud. Disability advocates called for stricter protections. Civil rights groups demanded investigations into other HOA abuses. The community, once silent under Karen's rule, now spoke freely. Neighbors held a candlelight vigil for Ava on the sidewalk where she'd fallen. The same people who once looked away were now sending cards, food, and letters of apology. The HOA board resigned in full within a week. Their silence and inaction had spoken volumes. They had enabled Karen for years, and now the whole country was watching. Her name became a cautionary tale, not just of cruelty, but of what happens when power is used to harm instead of protect. Ava survived, though the damage to her legs was permanent. She now uses a motorized chair, but if you ask her, she'll tell you that it just makes her faster. Her spirit never broke. It transformed. In the months that followed, she became a voice for others like her, speaking out about accessibility, safety, and the quiet ways discrimination hides behind policy. She started a blog, then a podcast, and now leads community panels across the state. Watching her speak, confident and unshaken, I don't just see my daughter. I see a survivor who turned pain into purpose and fear into fire. Justice isn't about vengeance. It's about accountability. When someone harms the vulnerable, they don't just break a rule, they shatter something sacred. Karen thought she could bully her way through life, that power meant control. But real power is using your voice to protect, to uplift, to defend those who can't always fight back. My daughter reminded me of that. She reminded the world. If you ever see injustice, whether it's loud or silent, don't look away. Speak, act. Because sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest weight, and sometimes the quietest strength belongs to the ones you tried hardest to silence.